Rodgers had his meeting with the New York Jets earlier this week. The New York Jets brass went all the way out to California, and now it sounds like things are about to come to a head here with Aaron Rodgers joining the New York Jets. This is something that we talked about earlier this week about, hey, these sides have interest there. Permission has been granted for Rodgers to go talk to New York to go talk to Rodgers out in California. I'm curious, though, because everyone's framing it as the ball is being in Aaron Rodgers' court and all that stuff. What do you think the compensation is going to be like when this deal ultimately becomes finalized?
Last week we reported that, hey, he wants to play football. Like, there's no way that they would have gotten on an airplane to fly 3,000 miles, waste all that money on fuel if the guy wasn't interested in playing football. Now, I know he's not said that he's officially coming back, and I'm sure he's couching it as if, well, I want to hear what they have to say. No, I think what you want to hear is what the contract's going to be. I think that's the whole meeting. The whole meeting is, can we agree on a deal? Can we agree on how we're restructuring this money you're owed and fit it into our salary cap? That's essentially what it is. All this reporting, well, the sides are moving closer. Well, of course they're moving closer. They flew all the way the hell out there. Do you think they're not going to come up with a deal? Like, to me, that's just trying to get Twitter followers to follow you. Oh, yeah, they're close. So I could say, well, this team's close to signing Jimmy Garoppolo. Is it going to happen? Of course, I don't know. But what does close mean? Here's the deal. They had to go out there to find out, A, how they're going to restructure the contract. You got Dave Dunn in the meeting. You got Aaron Rodgers. They're telling him his plan, even though it's couched as if he may not want to come back, but he does want to play. He wouldn't be taking the meeting if he didn't want to play. Mm-hmm. He would say, look, I'm not ready to decide whether I want to play or not. I don't need a meeting. No, of course you need a meeting. You want to hear what they have to say. So I taken the meeting, and the Jets seem to be the team. What I reported last week on the show was it's going to take you, it'll cost the Jets their first round pick. And then they've got to figure out the compensation for if he plays 1 year or if he plays 2 years or if he plays 3 years. So let's just say it's a 1 and a 3, okay, to get Rodgers. Mm-hmm. That 3 moves to a 2 if he decides to play in 2022, 2024. Or it moves to another 1 and I don't know where it's going to move to, but it'll be a solid pick with a conditional pick predicated on what's going to happen.
It's interesting that you bring up the first round pick because I was reading Albert Breer of the MMQB, his mailbag, and he thinks that they might not have to part with a first rounder. Given Rodgers' contract, given the age and the uncertainty, he thinks that the Jets might be able to get this done while keeping their first rounders, and maybe it's a second plus more stuff there. You keep referencing the first round pick. Is that kind of what you're hearing, that this has to be a first round pick centering the conversation, given that the Jets are pretty desperate for a quarterback?
I think that's what the Packers are asking for, right? They're asking for that 1. And I think Breer could be correct in the sense that they could shape it. You could say, okay, we're going to give you a 2. And then if he plays for 2 years, we'll give you an additional 1. And that'll be kind of contingent. I think there's a lot of ways to shape this, especially if you're Joe Douglas, the Packers will want to get rid of him, which we reported last week. The Packers are done with them. So that divorce has happened. I don't think they're going to be able to get that back together again. So once that occurs, the Packers don't have as much leverage in the negotiation on a trade, especially since they've agreed to let these two parties meet. Now, my sense of it is if I were Brian Gutekunst, I wouldn't allow the meeting to occur until the Jets agree to some form of compensation. Let's shape it. Mm-hmm. It's going to cost you X, Y, and Z. How we work it out, whether it's in 23 or 24, we got to still do that. But to me, before the meeting takes place, you've got to have some form of – because here's what happens. If Rodgers says, I want to play for the Jets, and you haven't agreed on compensation, the Jets says, well, I'll just give you a 7th. He wants to play for us. Well, no, wait a minute. No, because you don't want him back, right? So you've lost all your leverage in the negotiation. You can't do that.
Do you like how the Packers have played this? Because the Bob McGinn report came out a couple of weeks ago. That's something that we've referenced constantly on this podcast. Why did Green Bay let it get out that they want a divorce? Because to me, that almost gives the teams gives them the upper hand, like you said, of the leverage of, hey, we know you don't want to bring him back. It almost feels like the Packers should have played this how Seattle played it last year with Russell Wilson, to where Pete Carroll at the Combine was saying, hey, we're not looking to trade Russell Wilson, then boom, they trade him this week. So it's it feels like they could have played this a little bit differently to get more out of this trade here.
But Aaron's so good at telling his side. So how could they couldn't control the narrative, right? They really can't control the narrative of what's going on here. And I think at some point, everybody knew they were frustrated. Everybody knew in the league that they've had enough. I mean, you talk to former players that have played there, everybody's kind of like, we've had enough. Like, we need to move on. And they got the Love, your boy Love, pending in the next year. You got so many guys you love. It's ridiculous. You're going to need a big closet for all these jerseys.
That's all you need, man.
That 20. Yeah, that's all you need is a little bit of love, right? So that 20 million sitting out there, and I think they have to get to that. And so I don't know if they could have played it differently, specifically considering that, the Jets are so desperate. I mean, I would not say, as Springsteen said, I can't tell my courage from my desperation. I wouldn't say the Jets are being courageous here. I think they're being desperate. And I think the guy's a great player, don't get me wrong. But I think for the Jets, it's going to be hard. How do we manage our team when we have this enormous debt that we're going to pay this quarterback? What's our debt going to look like? How's it all going to affect ourselves?
Speaking of that desperation, I mean, you had Jets players tweeting at Aaron Rodgers. Sauce Gardner was tweeting, hey, I'll promise not to pick you off in practice, Aaron Rodgers, if you join the team. Breece Hall, their stud rookie running back, he tweeted at Aaron Rodgers saying, I'm manifesting at Aaron Rodgers. I don't know I get the recruiting pitch, but like you mentioned, it's reeks of desperation here. Like, you want to show interest, but you don't want to tell the Green Bay Packers, hey, like, this is our only plan. This is our only option. It's Rodgers or nothing. Like, what is it? Like, on the road trip, it says you eat or you don't eat at all. Like, that feels like where the Jets are coming with this thing with Aaron Rodgers. And I don't know if that's kind of how you want to go about it.
I think what the Jets are doing is they're saying, look, we're in the market for a quarterback. We're not lying, right? And if they can't get Rodgers, they'll go to Garoppolo or they'll go to somebody else. Now, they got Nathaniel Hackett in the building who helps them with Rodgers. He kind of has a relationship, so he can have communications with them. So, look, I think at the end of the day, the Packers still control it in the sense that they could just say to Rodgers, either you retire or you play here. I mean, they still have that, right? And we'll pay you the money. I get the sense that the Jets, because they want to go all in on it, it makes the most sense. I don't think Carolina's in this. I don't think the Raiders are in this, really, because I think it's hard for teams to build your team around them, right, when you're giving all this money in cap debt to that.
So do you see the Packers end up eating some of the contract with Rodgers, or is it going to be completely on the Jets side of things? Because I think that's what everyone's interested in terms of this contract and how it gets worked out. Does Green Bay have to take on some of that money, or do they give it all to New York and let New York kind of restructure something with Rodgers?
Of course, Bella's got to make an appearance here on the podcast. Why wouldn't she? Let's see.
Hey, Bella.
Yeah, of course. Bella travels too with a toothbrush. I think, to me, like Matthew Stafford, the Rams are willing to pay some of that. I think that's pretty clear. When you look at Allen Robinson, they're willing to pay some of his contract. So I think some of that is negotiable. I wouldn't say it's, I don't think I think it's part of the negotiation that the Packers would do that. The Packers have their cap issues too. I mean, they got to figure out how they're going to manage this when it goes off their cap in that situation. But I think that's all negotiable. I could see some of it. But if I were Gutekunst, I would say, look, if you want the player, you take the contract. I mean, you negotiate the contract with Dunn. You guys figure out the cash. We'll give you the player. Like, at some point, that's kind of big. But you also see it from this standpoint. If I pay a little bit of money, I get a first-round pick or I get a second-round pick. Like, if I said to them, look, we'll pay $10 million, but it's got to be the first, or we'll pay $10 million. We're not, it's all predicated. Everything's a separate negotiation within it, and you've got to handle that.
Final thing on this before we transition to our next topic here. Rodgers is either going to play for the Jets or the Packers next year, right? There's nobody else that you see jumping into this thing.
I don't see anybody with the sense of urgency that the Jets have had.
Okay.
Whether you call it courage or desperation, I don't see that. I haven't heard that. And I think that he does want to play. Now, I think a lot of it's going to come down to how much the Jets want to pay money-wise. And Dunn is smart enough to know how to make this happen.
Well, we've already started to see the odds move on the New York Jets with all the reports that have been out for a couple of weeks now. I mean, I believe they're down to about 16-1 at some places to win the Super Bowl. Everyone's anticipating that Rodgers will be with the New York Jets at some point in the coming days here. Thanks for watching the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi. And for more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to VSiN Live and the GM Shuffle podcast with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN, wherever you get your podcasts.